Praise be Jesus Christ, now and forever. We've just celebrated the feast of the conversion of St. Paul, one of the greatest men who ever lived. I've spoken of St. Paul before, but rather like the gospel itself, one can never exhaust thought or contemplation of the man, or fail to learn new lessons and gain new inspiration. Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul the Apostle of the Gentiles, has inspired many reactions throughout the centuries. There are some, including Christians, who don't actually like him, or who project onto him their own prejudices and contemporary fads and fashions. It's true he can appear at times in his letters to be difficult, sometimes boasting, sometimes stressing his status. The reality is, like all saints, he was an imperfect man, a human, but his greatness, apart from his work of evangelization, lies in his total dedication to Christ. My love and admiration for St. Paul has grown over the years, but I can truthfully say it was my visit to Damascus 2 years ago that made all the difference. One of the reasons we who claim the name of Christian should care and advocate for the Syrian church is because of St. Paul. If you love St. Paul, you should love and care about the Syrian church. The Syrian Christian community is as old as Pentecost, and it was, of course, in Damascus that Saul, the persecutor, was led to the house of Ananias on Straight Street to be baptized and become Paul the Apostle. Paul, as the Lord said to him, was God's chosen instrument to spread the gospel throughout the known world, but especially within the world of Greek and Roman thought and culture. It's not too extreme to say that there would be no Western civilization without St. Paul, despite the attempts of those who would deny the Christian foundation of Western culture, especially the culture of Europe. Yet despite his achievements, there are two things we could meditate on this week with St. Paul as our inspiration and guide. The first is the phrase Christ used when calling and commissioning Paul for his ministry, that he was the Lord's chosen instrument. An instrument, be it a violin or a hammer, can do nothing without the one who takes control of it, who wields it and directs it. The hammer must have someone to hold and hammer correctly. The violin needs someone to make music, not just scratch the horsehair over the strings. Part of St. Paul's greatness, and why he should be a model for us to imitate, was his total surrender to the great music maker, his Lord and Saviour. Paul knew, as he said so often, that he could do nothing without Christ. But as he said in Philippians 4:13, he could do all things through Christ who strengthens me. That's not just pious talk, and we should both treat it with deadly seriousness and imitate it. That's what enabled him to survive torture, shipwrecks, opposition. It's what enabled him to preach and give witness, and ultimately what enabled him to give the strength to face martyrdom. We can witness in our increasingly hostile society if we hand ourselves over to be instruments of Christ, and allied with that is the second lesson which St. Paul teaches and inspires us to imitate. Once again, it was a direct word from the Lord to Paul that gives us hope, strength and inspiration, if we believe and act. It's the extraordinary word that Christ says to Paul in 2 Corinthians, when Paul has pleaded for help with his struggles, as we all do. Jesus says to him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness." Pause, meditate, and digest. It doesn't depend on us. We most certainly and must certainly do all in our power, but it doesn't depend on our power or our gifts or personalities. One day, if we try and live like St. Paul, we will be able to say with St. Paul, "It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me." Brethren, rejoice, be perfected, be comforted. Be of the same mind, be at peace, and the God of peace and love will be with you.